Good afternoon, good morning and good evening to the fifth webinar of the NAMA facility. My name is Ash Sharma. I am a senior advisor to the NAMA facility and will be moderating today's webinar. Thank you all very much for joining us yet again in great numbers. This time around we have received almost 200 registrations, so a very warm welcome to all of you from us here in Berlin. Our series of webinars aims at providing information on the NAMA facility and disseminating lessons learned from our activities. Over the last 18 months, we have held 4 webinars focusing on various aspects of the NAMA facility, including financial mechanisms and information on the 4th call. All 4 webinars can be downloaded from our website. The objective of today's webinar is to reflect on some initial lessons learned from the NAMA support projects in early implementation. We have asked 3 of our project proponents to share some of these early experiences regarding, respectively, the use of financial instruments, private sector engagement, and policy and regulatory reforms. On this slide, you can see the technical support unit colleagues who have been involved in today's webinar. Next to me, you can see Tina and Zach from the technical support unit here in Berlin, as well as today's presenters, Ernesto Barbosa in Mexico City, Tim Mahler in Bangkok, and Juan Manuel Robledo in Bogota, Colombia. Tina and Zach are in charge of the technical functioning of the webinar, and I will be moderating. I will guide us through the content of this webinar and will answer your questions in the Q&A sessions to follow. But before going into details, my colleague Zach will guide you through some technical aspects of the webinar. Zach.
Thank you, Ash, and hello everyone. First off, let me give you a quick introduction to the control panel of the webinar, which you can see here on the right-hand side of the PowerPoint slide. I will also show these using my mouse. You have several settings. You can hide the control panel, and number 2, due to the high number of participants, we have put all participants on mute, and you will not be able to unmute yourself. In addition, you can view the webinar in a full screen using this button. This could be useful as the sessions will be accompanied by a presentation. You can also adjust the language of the control panel using the globe, which you can find on the top of the control panel. You have a questions tab where we ask you to write down the questions that you have throughout the session. You type in the question window that you find in the control panel. We, the webinar hosts, will be the only ones that can see it. We will answer the questions in the Q&A sessions, so please submit them beforehand. I will now hand things back over to Ash.
Thank you, Zach. First of all, let us take a brief look at today's agenda. Firstly, I will take the opportunity to provide a very brief introduction to the NAMA facility, and then we will move directly to the presentations from our proponents. First up, we have Ernesto Infante Barbosa from the Mexican Housing Development Bank, who will share some of the early experiences of this program with financial instruments in the Mexican housing NAMA. We then move to Tim Mahler, who is the project director at GIZ of the Thai project in the refrigeration and air conditioning sector. He will present the private sector engagement aspects of this NAMA. And finally, we will move to Juan Manuel Robledo, who is the director of the Center for Advanced Urban Development and Transport in Colombia, who will share his views on the policy and regulatory reform elements of the Colombian Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD, NAMA. We will have 3 breaks for questions and answers. We will gather your questions so that you can send these to us via the chat option as described. There will be 1 break after the first presentation one after the second, and a final round right after the third and at the end of the webinar. We would like to try to keep these Q&A sessions to around 5 minutes each. So first of all, to give a brief introduction to the NAMA facility. The aim of the facility is to support developing countries and emerging economies in implementing ambitious climate actions to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, otherwise known as the Nationally Appropriate Mitigation Actions, or NAMAs. These NAMAs can function as an important vehicle for which to implement nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. The NAMA facility itself is a multi-donor fund which was established by Germany and the UK in 2013 and was joined by Denmark and the European Commission in 2015. Total funding made available through this facility since its inception is around 262 million euros. And in the 4 calls that we've had to date, 21 projects have been selected so far for funding in 17 countries. And we expect an announcement on the 5th call by the end of the year. Now the NAMA facility implements the so-called NAMA support projects, or NSPs, and these cover the most ambitious part of the NAMA. So you can see in the diagram here that we have a NAMA support program in the bottom left-hand corner, supporting a much larger NAMA program. This typically includes funding for a combination of financial and technical measures, and we'll explore some of these today. We select our NSPs through annual bidding rounds. As I mentioned, we have had 4 of these already. And the key selection requirements are implementation readiness, the mitigation potential, and the opportunity for transformational change. Currently, the NAMA facility is engaged in cross-cutting climate mitigation programs in energy, housing, low-carbon transport, and waste management sectors. And here in the next slide, we can see where these projects are located. So you can see there's quite a wide geographical diversity of programs under implementation. So we move directly to our first presentation. It will be a presentation made by Ernesto Infante Barbosa from the Mexican Housing Development Bank, who will talk a little bit more about early experiences with financial instruments in the Mexican housing NAMA.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ernesto Infante. I'm from Mexico, and I work at the Mexican Development Bank SHF, which is focused on housing. I'm Deputy Director for Multilateral Affairs and Sustainability, and I'm Chief Coordinator of the Sustainable Housing Portfolio. I'm here to talk to you about the early experiences with financial instruments in the Mexican housing NAMA. And I'm going to try to give you a scope of the housing sector in Mexico, and then afterwards all what we've done as the strategy within SHF as a market development strategy for sustainability in the real estate markets. So first of all, I would like to start with the housing backlog in Latin America and Mexico, which is very relevant. Just to give you a big data, in Mexico we have a demand every year of 1 million units of new houses. This is a natural demand we have because of demographics and because of young professionals and because we have a demographic bonus going on for the last decade. And it's very important to notice that. So we have a big opportunity to improve what we are doing in this new housing in terms of mitigation, in terms of adaptation, and also in terms of the life cycle of materials, for example. The Mexican context of the economy is very relevant also. The housing sector represents a big pie of the GDP growth. It's a very dynamic sector which represents almost 80 branches of economy. This represents a lot in terms of employment. So it's a sector that is very relevant and very important to keep it healthy and dynamic. In the housing sector in Mexico, we have an institutional framework that enables to have products and mechanisms and strategies and policies that can be implemented in a very efficient way. It's very important to notice that in this administration from President Peña Nieto, we had a very important reform, a structural reform in which the Ministry of Housing was created back in 2013, and the new strategy for housing. This is the SEDATU. SEDATU is a Ministry of Housing in Mexico and has a mandate of the housing policy. And we, as SHF, as a National Development Bank, have as our head the Ministry of Finance. In this way, you can see we are the finance muscle of the sector. So we have a very relevant task in terms of giving the in terms of facilitating finance markets and facilitate access to housing for low and moderate income families, and also develop strategies to address housing deficits and develop products for undeserved markets. And also very important that nowadays we're implementing a sustainability strategy. The housing demand and the growth of this demand is very relevant in terms of the opportunity we have to improve what we are doing nowadays. As you can see in this slide, the possibilities for the next years are very relevant. As we can see, we're going to build around 5 million homes for the next 5 years, which could generate 70 million tons of CO2 in the cycle of the house. These emissions could be mitigated in some way if we improve how we are building them, how we are locating them, and the technologies we implement within them, and also if we try to early implement strategies to make more passive designs for these houses. Currently, as we can see, the sector represents a very huge part of the energy demand, almost 15%. This is also very representative in terms of the emissions of CO2. So in this context, the residential and the building sector has a very big impact in terms of climate change. So very many things to do. We in SHF, as a development bank, have become a catalyst of soft loans and also grants, such as NAMA facility, to implement new housing with energy efficiency standards. And we have in our portfolio that has been growing. And as you can see in this slide, this type of cascade gives the possibility to SHF to implement strategies early on the supply chain, and also from the supply side with the construction companies to implement and foster better strategies and implement more ambitious standards. In terms of the sustainable housing market development strategy of SHF, it's very relevant to tell you that the Mexican government has been one of the most dynamic and pioneer in terms of having a general law on climate change since 2012, and also a national strategy on climate change for 2050, which was presented back in the COP22 in Marrakech. We're one of the countries that signed the Paris Agreement back in Paris in 2015, and we are developing this Mexican housing NAMA as the first NAMA for housing in the world, and this has been very important in terms of what we have been doing and the efforts that have been done from the private and the public sector in the housing sector. In terms of what we've done in SHF for development and implementation, as you can see in this timeline, we have several products within our portfolio. And I have to tell you that back in 2012, there was no dollar for climate change. Now we have a lot of money for this. And it's a lot because we have been doing things very rapidly and in a very efficient way. Since 2012, we started designing and planning what we're going to do with the context and the framework of the NAMA for new housing. In this context, Tecocasa is our starting program, and the program that was a financial mechanism and scheme that started with the implementation of the housing NAMA in Mexico. The Mexican government was the first government in the globe to have the possibility of have access to the World Bank's Clean Technology Fund via the NAMA for Sustainable Housing. We had approximately $50 million US dollars from the multi-donor CDF as a soft loan to implement EcoCasa. We also catalyzed funding from the KfW as a soft loan and also resources from the IDB. So this was a mix and a blend of resources that made it possible for EcoCasa to be a very successful program, which was implemented since 2013. Afterwards, we started with rents with Life for passive houses, then NAMA facility for SMEs as a cousin of EcoCasa. They have differentiations in terms of what we do as the incentives or the carrots for the developers. SHF has the possibility to incentivize from the supply side. That's very important. So we incentivize the constructor, the builder, the developer. Afterwards, you can see EcoCasa 2, which was the second loan we had with KfW to give continuity to EcoCasa, and then we are migrating to another sectors, such as the rural sector, as the soft production, and also urbanization, in terms of cities. And now, at the end of this year, we're going to sign a new loan for EcoCasa 3. As you can see in the next slide, the portfolio now represents almost $400 million in terms of loans and grants, which represent almost $1 billion. We take into account the total investment, the revolvency we're going to do with this money. And this is almost 50,000 houses, I would say, because EcoCasa has now improved and has been beyond the goal it had of 27,000 houses. So it's a lot. This represents almost 2 million tons of CO2 in 40 years. The sustainable housing portfolio has now credit lines, as you can see, for new housing, for rent or leasing, and also for cities. And the Life resources are being used to implement the passive house. Now talking about NAMA facility, very important to say that this has been a very important alliance between the Mexican and the German government, with a lead executing agency as the Mexican Ministry of Environment, the Semarnat, back in 2010, in which we could have resources as a financial contribution from the German and British government of 14 million euros in two streams: the technical side with the GIZ and the CONAVI, and the financial side with the KfW and SHF. As of October 2017, in SHF, we have been implementing this since 2016. We have created a very robust program of implementation. We have a very interesting pipeline, and we are working with a lot of developers. It is very important to say that the resources that we have catalyzed from the NAMA facility have the objective to facilitate the progressive incorporation of SMEs, housing developers, in the low-carbon housing market. This is a challenge for the development bank or any bank, because SMEs are more difficult to make them get a debt or a housing construction loan. So this is a big challenge. That's why we are incentivizing these SMEs with direct subsidies, so we can pay them the cost they have for implementing the eco-technologies to get the standard of 20% above a baseline. And we have developed a very interesting methodology of evaluation. The criteria is very, very robust, and we have been using systems we implemented and designed along with the Passive House Institute in Germany. So it's very robust, a very integral analysis in which I can say it's very interesting how we do it with the whole house approach focus, in which we do not give the developers any prescription. We give them the possibility to have creativity, and with the incentives trying to push them to improve their prototypes and their schemes of implementation. And depending the type of weather, in Mexico we have several micro weathers, but 4 big climate zones: cold weather, mild weather, warm, dry weather, and also warm, wet weather, which makes it more complex and difficult for the implementation. So give them possibility to make the best designs and make the best they can do. And then afterwards, we can give them recommendations. It's very important to say that the subsidies are very relevant for SMEs, as they can have almost for free the costs of the implementation of new technologies. And it's very important to say also that this cost of new technologies with these subsidies are not being transferred to the buyer. In other words, the buyer is not going to pay with the mortgage the new technologies, so these buyers can always be will always have the possibility to get a mortgage. So they are not being pushed out of this possibility, having a more green house or more efficient house. So this is very important to say within the financial scheme. Within this context of NAMA facility, it's very important the capacity building we have been implementing with banks, with housing developers, with also other national housing organisms, such as Infonavit, as a financial institution for mortgages, and FOBISTE, one for the private sector, other for the public, and also with the national central government, such as CONAVI, which has a technical component. We have been implementing new technologies. We have catalyzed resources within this framework from several fundings to develop new tools for the site assessment, for the efficient water use, for the carbon footprint, and also for the supervision and verification of the sustainable housing, which will enable to have better monitoring of this housing. The benefits are several. We have benefits for the country in terms of the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Now we are showcasing the feasibility of building high energy efficient houses in Mexico. We are building internal capacities to spread know-how among a wide range of stakeholders. For the housing developer, it's very important for them to offer a better product to differentiate from the others. They get financial aid, technical capacity, and I would say the homeowner is the one that gets the most of it, as they have savings in terms of the operation of the house, which are in terms of economy very important, and also comfort. As a final remark, I would like to say the strategy of SHF has been trying to address key barriers from the technical side, from the design side, and also from the institutional and from the banking side, which are very important. That's why we have detailed planning, and we have many internal reforms within the bank, and the linkages within technology suppliers, technology fairs, and workshops. A lot of those things have been done. And the personalized technical assistance has been fundamental. The technical assistance becomes the most important thing sometimes to developers and also banks, to make them and push them towards better capacities and give them the possibility to, in the meantime or in the near future, internalize these capacities. I would like to say also that the key factors for success are, of course, the large Mexican housing market, the standard processes we have been implementing, the capacity building we are providing for free, the carrot, which is the incentive we have with the subsidy, and also, of course, the marketing strategy we are implementing within the bank, with the other private banks, and also with the housing developers from the supply and from the demand side, so that also a buyer can have the possibility to ask for more and for better housing. So the institutional coordination has been very important, the standardization of processes, and the involvement of different players, international and national, for the alignment of all the incentives that we can offer to the sector. Many thanks. I would like to say that you can find us in Twitter, on our webpage, and also on our bank's national webpage, and that the Mexican housing NAMA is maybe the most successful as for now, I would say. And within Ecocasa, as part of this framework, we've had several recognitions international. So happy to hear from you and to receive some questions afterwards. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much, Ernesto Infante, for your presentation regarding this very innovative NAMA program in Mexico. We have been receiving some questions, and if I may, I will ask the first question. I wanted to ask you, Ernesto, what has been the attitude of the commercial banks to the financing of these new eco-technologies. I'm wondering whether you encountered any particular barriers, or if so, how did you overcome these?
Hi, thank you, Ash, for this question. Well, yeah, it has been very interesting for us. We are a second-tier development bank. We do have strategies via trust funds to give credit lines directly to developers, but most of the credit lines we do for the NAMA facility and the COCASA programs are given by smaller and medium-sized banks. This is a challenge in terms of the capacity building they have internally. I mean, their supervision and credit engineers and architects. So I would say they are with a very positive view of the sustainability, with a very positive position towards implementing these type of programs. Nevertheless, sometimes it makes it difficult to make it national. What I'm trying to say is that we are with a bank with HQs in Mexico City. Most of the commercial banks do the same, and sometimes it's more difficult to get the same information to the northern part, to the southern part of the country. It's a big country. So what we do is travel a lot, make regional meetings with banks' offices, and with the main factor of success with banks has been the possibility they have 24, not 24/7, but during office hours, to contact us with our office in the promotion office of these programs, and let us know any difficulties they have, and let us know what the clients are asking for. And then we have a three-way communication with the bank, with the developer, and sometimes with the mortgage bank that's going to end with this house, and that makes it more effective. I mean, for the last 4 years, we have seen a very positive evolution, but I would say there are several barriers. Paradoxically, with small size and medium banks, it's easier to work than with the biggest. The biggest sometimes have more issues and difficulties to internally move or push forward green portfolios. But we are pushing that, and I would say it's a very relevant task, because they are our sales force, if I may say this. It's also very important that we make this possible for the banking system, because that's how we are going to make it sustainable on time.
Okay, thank you. And one more question. I was wondering, what is the experience of your bank as regards loan guarantees? How has this been accepted by the banks?
We have a lot of business with warranties. 7 out of 10 pesos, or 70 cents of every dollar, are used for guarantees and insurances. In 2013, we had a very big crisis from the supply side. The most important companies, housing developers, collapsed, and we had a very big crisis. So there has been a new configuration of the supply side with new developers. So guarantees are very well seen. We work with them a lot. Nevertheless, for the sustainable portfolio, even though we have guarantees for NAMA facility, and we do have incentives for banks, we haven't seen a big appetite. Maybe it's because we are still working a lot with SMEs that are already well known for the market or the banks. But maybe in the meantime, I mean, for the next couple of years, maybe we will use some of them. But I would say guarantees and insurances have become the most important factor of success in the real estate sector for the last 4 years. There's a crisis we had in the sector. From the supply side with guarantees for constructions, for banks, and also with the insurance of portfolios that have mortgages. So I would say 70% of our business, I mean, as an overall, as a whole in the bank, is with this indirect credit, no? With guarantees and insurances. So I would say it's a very good incentive. I would say it has been very important
for the success of the last 4 years within the bank. But maybe nowadays it's more mature. They are not needed as much, but we have the possibility of still using them if needed with NAMA facility, for example.
Okay, thank you very much, Ernesto. So we should move on directly to the next presentation. And this is a presentation which will be made by Tim Mahler, who's the project director of GIZ Thailand for the Thai refrigeration and air conditioning NAMA. So we pass you directly on to this presentation.
Hello to everybody from my side. My name is Tim Mahler and I'm representing the refrigeration and air conditioning NAMA, or RUC NAMA, in Thailand. Our project has started its implementation in April 2016, so roughly 1.5 years ago, and we were granted a total amount of 14.7 million euro by the NAMA facility for both capacity development as well as to set up a financial mechanism fostering investments in the 4 subsectors that are covered by our project. These subsectors are domestic refrigeration, commercial refrigerations, the chiller sector, as well as air conditionings or ACs. The RUC NAMA project in Thailand is Thailand's first NAMA, and it is being implemented, and it reflects the importance of the sector in Thailand. Of course, as you know, Thailand, or if you know Thailand as a tropical country that has developed fairly quickly over the last decades, Thailand has a growing need for cooling equipment, both for private households as well as for commercial applications. Due to the increase in use, we estimate that the cooling applications today already contribute 1/4 of the country's CO2 emissions, but that these emissions will further grow with a growing demand for cooling and refrigeration equipment. The majority of these emissions result from the energy, but about 1/4 comes from the high global warming potential refrigerant, so the chemicals that are used to operate the cooling systems. But not only due to the large emissions in the sector, the RUC NAMA is a priority for Thailand. Energy security is another factor, as the use of ACs, especially during the summer and in peak hours, poses a challenge for the energy supply side. And finally, Thailand is not only a large user of refrigeration and air conditioning equipment, but Thailand also serves as a production hub for the region, with exports all over the region in Southeast Asia. So any effort in Thailand unfolds impacts elsewhere as well. Therefore, for a number of reasons, it is important for Thailand to tackle the emissions in the cooling sector from both sources, from the energy use as well as from the refrigerant use. It is then the objective of the project to initiate a sector-wide transition towards the use of climate-friendly and energy-efficient cooling technologies. The project addresses the objective from 3 sides. First, we work from the supply side. Then we also work from the demand side, and our project also works on framework conditions to support the introduction of energy-efficient and climate-friendly cooling technologies that use natural refrigerants with a low global warming potential. So when working on the supply side, the project provides technical and financial support to producers to enable them to produce energy-efficient and climate-friendly cooling technologies here in Thailand. The project also supports the servicing sector, as safety, of course, is one of the major concerns of the project, and the servicing sector needs to be ready to service these technologies that are brought into the market by our project. On the demand side, so on the other side of the market, the project introduces a financial mechanism directly targeted at energy-efficient cooling technologies using low global warming potential refrigerant, and it also works with key end users to promote the use of the technologies that the project supports. The cooperation with the supply side as well as the cooperation with the demand side, of course, relies on a very strong involvement of the private sector, and I will later outline a bit more on how this cooperation with the private sector goes. However, of course, not only the private sector is key for the success of our project, but also the framework conditions set by governments have the potential to provide strong incentive for change in the cooling sector. But unfortunately, at the same time, the framework conditions can also pose substantial barriers that need to be overcome to be able to develop into the direction of green cooling. These barriers that create challenges for us to the project lie especially in the field of production standard and that need to be applied prior to market introduction, as well as in the field of building regulation, which prohibits the use of some technology options in Thailand at the moment. Those both barriers are addressed in the project together with our political partners, and the potential, of course, to create incentives are also tackled by the project through adjustments of framework conditions for minimum energy performance standards, so-called MAPs, and also by HEPS, the High Energy Performance Standards, or so-called energy labels, with which we are very familiar also in the European market. On labels, the country is currently working in close cooperation with the Energy Generating Authority of Thailand, or EGAT, that is in charge of the widely used energy efficiency label called label number 5 here in Thailand. And together with EGAT, we want to raise the ambition of the label for cooling equipment, and we're working on extending the label for subsectors that are not covered yet, such as chillers. Especially the domestic refrigerator sector is very widely covered, so is the AC sector. But as I said, chillers not yet. It can also be an important and strong signal to include the energy efficiency and climate-friendly cooling aspects in policy documents, be it on the energy side, so policy document by the Ministry of Energy, or more generally on climate change, for example in the NDC. And here the project already succeeded in including the specific challenge of the cooling sector, also linked to the refrigerants, not only to the energy side, in Thailand's implementation roadmap for its NDCs. But of course, while framework conditions are one of the important aspects of the project, the main success factor for Ragnama is how we manage to cooperate with private sector and how we are able to convince the private sector to change their current practices. And this is of course not an easy task. We are aiming for this. We are aiming for a transformational change, and then whenever something is changed, there are those that see opportunity and might be winners from the change, and there are those who see change as a threat to their current position and oppose change. This is especially difficult in a sector as the refrigeration and air conditioning sector, that is dominated by large industrial companies that are driven, of course, by profit rather than the wish to do something good for our climate, and that also make profits with the refrigerants, and that dictates to a large extent where the market is moving to compare to those market forces. And of course, compared to the multi-facility project is pretty small. Even of course the 40.7 million is a lot of money, and we have to find our niche and find partners to drive this change. These partners can be part of the government, but of course for our project also come from the private sector. Within the private sector, the Ragnama project cooperates with different types of companies from different sectors. We work on the one hand with manufacturers of refrigeration and air conditioning products, and we also cooperate with end users that create a demand for the equipment. We will work with financial institutions such as banks or credit card companies to support the market introduction, and we will work with the servicing sector. So let me give you a brief overview on where we stand in these 4 subsectors and what we have experienced so far in the last year and a half, or let's say it takes some time to set up a project, so over the last year, and would like to start giving you some experiences that we have made with the producers. As I already explained, producers are a main target group of the project, and Ragnama offers technical experience or expertise for product development and for production line conversion towards the production of climate-friendly and energy-efficient cooling products. So far, we have received 7 expressions of interest of different companies that are interested to cooperate with us, covering different subsectors. These local companies are interested in working with us as they hope to receive access to technical knowledge through our teams of international, national and technical experts. But they also hope to receive financial support to help them cover part of the investment costs when changing production line. Moving into a new direction can be, of course, interesting for local producers for different reasons. In some sectors, we experience that there's already a well-established market trend, and we can help them to be able to follow this trend. In other subsectors, local producers have to find their niche against very large international companies and want to be innovative to separate themselves from these large international companies. Yet, of course, cooperating with local companies has advantages and disadvantages also for our Ragnama project. The advantage we experience in cooperating with local companies is that the cooperation with those local companies also opens some doors when discussing framework condition with the government. And of course, projects like ours should be careful to provide financial incentives to huge international companies anyway, as they have enough resources and technical know-how themselves and don't need grant funding from European governments. However, the disadvantage to concentrate only on local companies is that even if we manage to change all local producers, a real transformation is still not, in some sectors at least, not possible without the large market players. And it is unlikely that these international companies move the technology due to pressure from smaller local producers. So that can be a challenge. On the other hand, without an involvement from international companies, it becomes difficult to convince local producers, as moving against the direction of large companies dominates the market, exposes them to risks, and of course then creates risks that further down the line in the process of selling their equipment. So it is certainly not easy to convince those producers, but with those 9 companies that we are now starting to work, we are happy that we have managed to establish this link. But of course, talking about who sets market trends and that large companies, producing companies set market trends, but of course it is not only that these market trends come from the supply side, but also the demand side has a very strong influence on the market trends. We can see that, for example, in the field of commercial refrigeration, in which over the last year a number of major international players like Coca-Cola or Unilever have moved into the direction of climate-friendly and energy-efficient cooling using natural refrigerants. While this trend is well established in Europe and in other developed or more developed regions, in Thailand the supply side for such commercial refrigeration devices is still very limited. Hence, here we work with producers to be able to produce these products, but we also work, for example, with large supermarkets, or we can work with hotel chains to create a solid demand that help us to push producers in this direction. And to be even more convincing in our argument towards producers who we want to convince to change their production lines and their practices and move into a climate-friendly sector, is the right choice, that this is the right choice for them, and offers opportunities for their companies. We cooperate with banks in creating financial support for the market introduction. Here we still stand at the beginning of the process. We are currently negotiating the transfer of funds that were granted by the NAMA facility to us, to our public partner institution. And also for this sequence of project implementation, of course, first of all, we need to change production lines, and we need to support the producers in doing that, both technically and financially. And then after that, the financial incentives for market introduction are needed to support this market introduction. But we experience that this whole package is also convincing to producers. We work with them, we work with the demand side, we also provide financial incentives. And then the fourth pillar of our support is on the servicing sector, as of course also for the producing companies, safety is a big issue. And it is also of key importance for the project that both the production process as well as the product themselves comply with international safety standards. So to avoid any kind of accidents, it is required that especially the servicing staff knows of the risks that need to be dealt with when servicing these equipment, especially the particular challenges of equipment using natural refrigerants. Hence, the project cooperates with public training centers as well as with the producers to improve the capacity of servicing staff. And ultimately, the quality of staff to service the equipment, as I already said, influences the decision of producers whether or not to move into a new direction. As of course for companies, the risk can be too big if they cannot guarantee for an appropriate and especially a safe servicing. So that's how we see it. We have the very strong focus at the moment on cooperating with the manufacturers, and we try to kind of build up a package that enables them to drive into a direction of energy efficient and climate friendly cooling. So I hope this gave you a quick overview of the project and our approach on cooperating with the private sector. I would like to end it here, but of course I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for highlighting the private sector engagement aspect of the Thai RAC NAMA. There are a couple of questions that we have, which perhaps you can comment on briefly. The project intervenes directly in a already functioning market of suppliers. How do you avoid the situation where there could be a negative aspect of market distortion in this sector?
Yeah, good question. I mean, as you said, the market in Thailand is already pretty set up, and there are lots of local companies, but also international companies that work in the market, and of course that fight for their market shares. What we do is basically we go also through the Chamber of Commerce here and offer the same opportunities for all companies. We kind of explain our approach, we explain the opportunities, and we make it kind of a integrating process, trying to especially address the local companies and try to show them the opportunities that we can offer and create chances for them to participate. So after kind of introducing especially the industry players about our approach, about the different refrigerants in their subsectors and about the targets that we are pursuing, and then also the offers that we can give, we started kind of a public expression of interest process in which we publicly announced, and we didn't only publish in newspapers, but of course also sent to those forums where this industry meets, to kind of make it a very open and fair process in which companies can kind of express their interest in cooperating with us and then work with us on specifying what kind of support they would like from us. So then in this first round of expressing interest, we have received nine expression of interest from different subsectors, which we then followed up by kind of working with them, specifying what the support is that they actually need, both on the technical side and on the financial side. As I already said, we are setting this financial mechanism up. But then, so there's like a general call for expression and then a very specific definition of support along the lines of the needs of the different producers. And I think there will be several rounds of when we open this call and try to invite more companies in, the further we go. So we feel like we have a process that is actually fair and that provides everybody the chance to participate. And with that, we have avoided so far any kind of hard feelings against preferring some companies, but it has been seen as an opportunity for those that want to participate, but of course not an obligation for anybody, as there are other programs, for example, under the Montreal Protocol that work through obligations, and our project works through opportunities, and those that see the opportunities can choose to take them, and others can choose to leave that.
Okay, Tim, just one more brief question. One of the participants has asked, when the NAMA supports switching AC refrigerants to propane, the Ministry of Industrial Works uses Montreal funding to support switching to HFC 32. Are there any tensions or confrontations between these two ministries as a result?
Between the two ministries, the Ministry of Industry and the Ministry of Environment?
Yes.
I mean, it's certainly true that under the Montreal Protocol, with supported by the World Bank, Thailand has gone through this process to changing to the least climate harmful HFC R32. And now we are kind of providing opportunities for those producers that would like to work with us to go one step further. So of course, we had to explain that this is not like against the process that the Ministry of Industry together with the World Bank are implementing, and we're not trying to kind of to get in the way of that process, but rather we would like to show opportunities for those that are willing to go even further and take another step that is actually also in line with the Kigali Amendment of the Montreal Protocol to outphase HFCs. So in that sense, we are also cooperating with the Ministry of Industry in different sectors, such as the monitoring sectors, and we have established quite a good cooperation with them. And I don't think it has led to great or it has led to conflicts. It is rather seen as an addition and not as a competition to what DRW, the Ministry of Industry, is doing with the World Bank.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to move swiftly on to the final presentation. Thank you again, Tim. This is a presentation being made by Juan Manuel Robledo, who is the director of the program in Colombia, which works with the Transit-Oriented Development, or the TOD-NAMA. So we move directly to this presentation, and hopefully we'll still have some time for a question or two at the end of this.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the NAMA facility for inviting us to participate to this webinar. Before starting, please allow me to say a few words about FinDeter. We are a Colombia development bank that offers integral solutions for development of sustainable territories, with the final aim of improving the quality of life of Colombian people. FinDeter is the entity that is currently implementing the Colombia TOD NAMA through a structure that is called Ciudad. I will first make a short introduction to explain what is Ciudad and what does the Colombia TOD NAMA consist in. Then I will take a few minutes to explain the main challenges that we have identified with regard to public policies and to explain how do we plan to address those challenges. Eventually, we will see some examples of interventions that Ciudad is currently undertaking to go ahead with policy work on TOD. So let's start with a brief introduction of Ciudad. Ciudad stands for Center for Urban Interventions of Advanced Development to Transportation. It is a program that is hosted in FinDeter, and with Ciudad, we want to boost the implementation of urban development and sustainable mobility projects in Colombia through the generation of public policy recommendations to national government. Now, when we talk about TOD, it stands for Transit-Oriented Development, which refers to coordinating planning and design of transit and urban land use development. A TOD is typically a neighborhood of mixed-use residential and commercial areas with high-quality public spaces that are designed to maximize access to public transportation for pedestrians and bicycles. Typically, TOD neighborhoods have a central transit station surrounded by relatively high-density development with progressively lower density development spreading outward from the center. By applying this concept, we can reach reduction in CO2 emissions and get more benefits for people, such as reduction in travel distances and transportation time, better air quality, and at the end, a better quality of life in urban areas. The overall objective of the Colombia TOD NAMA is to generate policies that allow transforming the way we do urban development in Colombian cities. In order to do that, we aim to implement pilot projects in catalytic neighborhoods of 3 cities, which are Pasto, Cali, and Manizales. Those projects will help to get concrete examples of the economic, social, and environmental benefits of this development model, to see how we can reach public and private financing, and probably the most important for the topic of this presentation, to identify barriers or weakness in terms of policy and regulation for TOD projects. Those barriers are what we want to overcome at the end of the NAMA support program through the elaboration of national policy recommendation. This slide shows the actual framework in which we are working, and we can see that Colombia already has a whole bunch of regulatory and policy documents related to urban development and mobility. But the main difficulty here is the articulation between those documents, since there is a structural frontier between transport and territories housing, which belong to 2 different ministries. So, what are our current challenges in that context? First, it is to overcome the limited policy integration that I just mentioned. Secondly, it is to promote higher density and mixed-use development in the cities. Then, we as a country have to reach a better articulation for local planning instruments. Through policy, we also have to potentiate public transport as a structural axis of mobility within the cities. In parallel, we need to reinforce value capture mechanisms and to position it as a financial asset for municipalities and project developers. And finally, we have to find a way to engage public-private partnership to guarantee project sustainability. For all of these challenges, we will work on policy recommendations and guidance that will provide the cohesive glue to connect national, local policies. At the end, with this TOD policy complete framework, we will get a fertile ground for TOD projects scaling up and replicability on the long run. Having that said, let's take a closer look at how do we plan to address those policy and regulatory challenges. The most efficient way to tackle the limited policy integration among sectors is to have all the concerned governmental actors sitting at the same table to work those issues out. This is the reason why CIRAT involves 4 Colombian ministries, and so to guarantee articulation among all actors, CIRAT is formed by, on one hand, the advisory committee that meets every month to work on technical and policy issues. On the other hand, a board where stand vice ministers and directors, which meets at least twice a year to define orientations and take decisions that will eventually lead to the creation of a TOD-specific policy framework. Concerning the second challenge, CIRAT works on the formulation of recommendations to increase densities and mixed-use development in cities, and the idea is to include these recommendations into the national regulatory reform of land use master plans that I will tell you more about it in a few minutes. With regard to better articulation of local planning instruments, it is important to understand that in Colombia, the land use master plans, or POTs, sets a general framework into which the cities then develop a specific master plan, like master plan for mobility, for public spaces, or for parking management. Our experience is that in many occasions those plans are not articulated between themselves. Sometimes they are not even consistent. So there is a real need of articulation if we want to do TOD. We plan to address this by including specific recommendations in the Mother POTS program, and also by helping the national government to define what a mobility master plan consists of through a specific regulation related to more than 10 years existing law. Likewise, the issue of potentiating public transport as a structural axis of mobility will be addressed by including recommendations into another national policy document that is currently under development. It is called Compass of Mobility. Later, I will talk about that one too. Finally, we are also currently conducting a study to bring answers to the value capture issue. The study will help to identify and design mechanisms that apply specifically to TOD projects. And based on that, we will be able to elaborate guidelines for the cities on how to use value capture as a mechanism to improve the financial viability of TOD projects. As for the public-private partnership in Colombia, there's a law from 2012 that defines general rules, but there's a need to adapt those rules for TOD projects. Just to give some concrete examples of CIRAT interventions, here are more details about the new generations of land use master plans that we call modern POTS. Basically, this is a national government program that aims to reform the old POTS of Colombian cities and define a new generation of POT with higher quality standards. It will be implemented in 100 municipalities in Colombia, including 7 metropolitan cities. So this is an interesting opportunity for us to recommend guidelines and standards on compact urban model, on mixed land use, on public transport oriented planning model, and urban value capture. The second example of intervention that we do relates to the compass of mobility. which is a policy document that is currently being developed by the National Planning Department. Its objective is to promote guidelines for the integral management of sustainable mobility in the cities of the country. It applies to every municipality, but prioritizing those that have more than 100,000 inhabitants, and especially those that have integrated mass transport system or strategic public transport systems. So there is clear opportunity here to connect with TOD principles and in particular to include recommendations on intermodality schemes for public transport, on infrastructure financing, and on demand management. This is the state of progress of the Colombia TOD NAMA on the policy development activities. In conclusion, there is still a long road to go in order to reach the complete TOD policy and regulatory framework, but we can already see that the key component here is to keep close communication and a strong articulation with all actors involved in policy making, both at national and local level. Thank you for your attention. Steve and I are now willing to answer any question or comment you may have.
Okay, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. We're almost out of time, but I would like to just ask one question. In regard to this process of TOD policy development, has there been an opportunity for citizens to engage in this process?
Well, yes, we have been working especially with national government and with local governments, making small workshops about national policies and what are they expecting to work on and to go further on with the actual policies. But we also are making some workshops, especially in the cities where we have the pilot projects. We work with bigger workshops with the community where we ask them what are they expecting about the projects, and also what are they expecting that the results on the policy, the national policy, could be. So that way we also gather all the community opinion and try to engage it with the national and local government's thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much. It sounds like a very participative program. I'm afraid I think that's all we have time for in terms of questions. Thank you once again to all our speakers and participants. I would just like to do a very short wrap-up. I would say that in summary, the NAMA facility is a multi-donor climate finance instrument which has supported projects for funding on the basis of transformational change, mitigation, potential or ambition, and feasibility. And we now have a number of projects at various stages of implementation. Today we have learnt and heard from project implementers from Latin America and Asia, their experiences in sectors as diverse as low carbon transport, housing, and refrigeration. The NAMA facility remains committed to being a learning hub, disseminating lessons learned in this way in the implementation of our climate change programs globally, and we encourage our projects to do likewise. We hope that you found these interventions to be useful. For those who will be attending the COP23 event in Bonn later this year, please note that the NAMA facility will hold a side event on Monday the 13th. Further information will be made available at the NAMA facility website. Last and by no means least, you will be provided with a link to the documentation of this webinar by email. This will include a recording of the website and our YouTube film. For more information on the NAMA facility and to register for our newsletter, please do visit our website. And finally, thank you all for your participation and for your questions. We wish you all a pleasant day. Thank you.